has a lot of nice pictures and some really solid content in it. But my sense is that more and more institutions are trying to take their print stuff and focus it lower down in the funnel for students who have expressed greater levels of interest in the institution. And as a result, search, which are proactive outreach to students who have not yet expressed an interest in a particular institution, has tended to be concentrated a little bit more in electronic communication, is what I'd say.
Great. Andy Strickler, you ready for a deep dive on student search?
Mark, I'm always ready for a deep dive with you on anything.
Thank you. So I've asked Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, one of our podcast co-hosts, to do a really deep dive on student search, which is something that some people may not be familiar with that term, but for most colleges, it plays a pretty foundational role in helping generate prospects. So why don't you start, Andy, by just telling our listeners what student search is?
Student search, it's the process by which we can proactively go out and secure, purchase, get names of high school students that we can enter into our database and then directly market to. In some respects, it's the flip side of the coin to sort of reactive recruitment, which is, Connecticut College, we're located within 400 meters of I-95. So anyone driving up the Northeast corridor will see a sign and say, oh, Connecticut College, maybe we should go visit. That's sort of reactive. This gives us the ability to identify, a significant number of names of high school seniors, juniors, sophomores, and start introducing them to Connecticut College. And the process is, the reality is that when you sign up for the SAT or the ACT, you fill out this extensive, lengthy form as part of the registration to take the test. And as part of that, you can opt in or opt out to having your name distributed to colleges and universities who may be interested in your type of student. So we work with, various third-party vendors. The most prominent one is College Board, which, sort of operates the SAT. And we will purchase a certain number of names with a certain set of criteria that sort of fit what we're looking for here at Connecticut College. We secure the names, and then we can start reaching out to them and saying, hey, have you heard of Connecticut College? Would you like to learn more about Connecticut College? Are you interested in small liberal arts colleges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So, when I arrived at Con in 2015, we had very little sort of historical footprint in student search or proactive recruitment. And that has become kind of part of our standard operating procedure as we have worked to introduce ourselves to people in our own backyard, sort of the I-95 corridor, but also in terms of more of a national landscape, introducing ourselves to people in the Midwest, the South, the West Coast, et cetera. And maybe they're looking at institutions out east, but they just haven't heard of Connecticut College. And as a result, it gives them additional options that they can research and pursue.
Yeah, no, well said. So the way I like to explain it, and see if you would agree with this, the way I explain it to my students, think of yourself as a college, and you need to enroll a certain number of kids. What's your number over there, Andy? How many do you have to bring in a new class?
I don't know, 450 to 500.
All right, so 450 to 500. I got to get 450 to 500 kids. So think of what are all the ways that you could think of you could get those students. So let's say one option is traveling and visiting their high school and doing presentations. Mm-hmm. Well, schools do that, but with 28,000 high schools out there, nobody has the manpower to get to all of them. And even if you do, sometimes kids have a conflict and they can't even come at the time you go there.
Correct.
So you say, okay, I'll do fairs. We'll do fairs in the area. Great. Schools do that. But what are the chances that you're going to get all the people to come to your fair and then come to your table at your fair? Sometimes schools say, hey, we'll set up at a Marriott and we'll do a presentation. We only do a fair. We'll do like an info session, or maybe we'll combine with a few other schools and we'll each reach out to people. Once again, another great idea. But what are the chances that you reach everybody? Well, we'll get people to visit our campus. Once again, colleges are doing that. But what are the chances you reach everybody? We'll rely on people to come on our website and request information. Like all of those things colleges do, but what are the chances that you can sort of have the national reach where student search? What it can do is it can identify overwhelming majority of people looking at college, because if you're, for example, College Board, they'll look at if you took a PSAT or an SAT or an AP exam.
AP exam.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can even get in early because there's, some people doing PSATs at younger ages.
Right.
And there's a much better shot of you getting access to the entire country, and something Andy and I are going to talk about a little later, something called the admissions funnel. We'll talk about this because this obviously sinks into the admissions funnel, first phase. But like your chances of reaching everybody and blanketing your coverage are just so much better by starting out with something comprehensive versus the other recruitment things that I said, which there's, they're worth doing, which is why people do them. But it's going to be micro. It's going to be a few kids here, a few kids there. You're going to miss just large swaths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. I'm a Pennsylvania native. Pennsylvania is my territory. We have some fabulous kids from Pennsylvania here that I just don't have the time to get to their high school. So, they discovered us, or we discovered them and introduced them to Con, and they realized, oh my gosh, this is a really great place. It fits what I'm looking for, yada, yada, yada. And they end up here. And do I have the ability to travel to Pittsburgh and York and Lancaster and Harrisburg? I don't. I can.
And even if you did, if you did, you wouldn't necessarily meet every single person that's a good fit just by virtue of your time and their schedule and things not being aligned. So even if you did, you're still going to miss a lot.
Yeah, they have a test. The 40-minute window that I'm actually there in the building, or they had a field trip, or they were sick that day, or they had early dismissal because they had a tennis match. There are a million things that can interrupt that. So you're absolutely right there.
Awesome. Now let's talk about some of the criteria, because I think some people might be surprised, but colleges have a fair amount of latitude with how they can target.
Absolutely.
Right? So why don't you go through all the things that you can think of, and I'm sure you may not remember them all, but all the things that you can think of that when you're building a campaign, maybe you may even want to go back there. Like, do you work with, say, for example, a college board contact who you'll work with a campaign on them and say, this is what I want search to include? Talk a little bit about that and talk about some of the criteria that you can use when you're wanting to micro target.
So there are essentially three ways you can do it. There are institutions that farm out their entire search process to a third party vendor. So they pay a company and say, all right, you figure out the campaign, figure out the characteristics that we're looking for in a student. You communicate with them. And if a student says, yes, I'm interested, then you give us the name. You can work with a college board sort of client services manager to help, or you can just do it in-house yourself, which is what we do. When we started, I worked with College Board a little bit, but we've done it enough times that we kind of have a sense as to what we're looking for. And you can go through a whole number of sort of criteria.
Let's talk about some of them.
Yeah. First is geography. There are 50 states in the country, and via College Board Search and other organizations, they have what are known as EPS markets. And as a result, each state is divided up into sort of smaller subsections. And, some states are huge, like there are 30, 35 different EPS markets in the state of New York. In Connecticut, there are 7 or 8. So you can refine it down to various EPS markets, or you can go zip code by zip code by zip code if you so choose. So you can lay out geographically the entire country based on where you would like to sort of target your purchases. And as an example, one of the things we first did when we arrived here at Con is we looked at 3 to 5 years of historical data based on where we got our applications, where our admitted students came from, and where our deposited students came from, what those zip codes were that profiled positively for Connecticut College. And then what we did is we worked with one of our vendors and said, all right, you have a history in sort of census research. We're looking for other zip codes in the United States that profile similarly to these 20 to 25 to 30 to 50 zip codes that have performed really well for us historically. And that was one of the early sort of search criteria that we used, is we had it sort of a zip code analysis done. And then we started adding zips that profiled similarly across the United States. So geography can be a huge sort of initial criteria to help you figure out, what you're trying to do.
And a lot also with geography too, Andy, you can profile people who you are more likely to be successful because of the similar criteria like you mentioned, but you could also use it to micro target places where you don't have kids, right? Like we'd love to
Exactly.
have more
Like, for
Midwest
instance,
kids or rural kids or whatever. Yeah.
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 We historically have not had a big footprint in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
There you go.
So one of the things we're saying is let's find zip codes in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that profile similarly to Brookline, Wellesley, and some of the Boston suburbs
Sure.
that we historically have a significant footprint in. Okay. The other thing that institutions will do is they'll work with their alumni office to determine where, and they use sort of a heat map.
Mhm.
Where have our alums landed? And where you can find a big concentration of alums also becomes a pretty good area to sort of buy some names via College Board or other search vendors, because there's a little bit of word of mouth. There are car stickers driving around.
Sure.
You know, people go to cocktail parties or go to the lacrosse game and someone's wearing a Connecticut College sweatshirt or something like that. There's a little bit greater word of mouth about the institution there. So geography is huge. Second is score range. You know, you can designate we want an SAT or a PSAT or an AP test range of X to X.
Yeah, and
So
they
you
won't let you pick the exact number unless they've changed.
They let you pick the exact
Oh,
number.
they do. Okay, that's a change. You remember before when it used to have to be like in 50-point increments or whatever? Yeah.
Yep.
So
Now I think it's exact.
Okay. So
I could double check for you because I just, was
yeah,
looking
get back
at
to
it
me on
earlier
that.
today.
Get back to me on that. In the past, they wouldn't, it wouldn't be precise, but it could be within 50 points. So, you couldn't say, 1330, but you say 1300.
I think it's exact now.
Yeah. Yeah. You
I'll
can look
it
it up right now.
later for you.
Yeah.
I'll
you can look it up right.
text later.
Yeah. Shoot a text.
Yeah.
Later. So,
see, score range, you can pick specific AP exams.
Yeah.
You can pick specific intended majors.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we'll leave out is we don't offer engineering.
Sure.
So anyone who says, yeah, I'm interested in engineering, we're not going to click that box.
Right, because you're not going to
we don't offer engineering. But, anything that can land in kind of the liberal arts field, we're going to say people who identify with this particular major, boom. They also, you can use criteria based on academic performance in high school.
Yes.
They will tell you what their average grades are. Here are my grades.
Because that, so if you're a student listening, when you fill out that pre-form, these are the kinds of questions that are on there, right?
Correct.
And you're taking SAT, ACT before, and then you say, do you want people to contact you? These are the kind of questions. Self-reported GPA.
Yep.
They'll use the actual test score that comes back because they have access to that for that as opposed to your self-reported score.
Correct.
But obviously they have your address. So, you can use all of that. They'll ask about intended major.
Correct.
On there. So you can get all that. That's all on that form that the student fills out is where they derive that information from.
Exactly. And then lastly is they will ask, and I was playing with it earlier this year, it's sort of highest intended educational attainment. High school, 2-year degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, professional degree, et cetera, et cetera. So you can also target students who profile and project, I'd like to get at least a 4-year degree. Boom, boom, boom. You can select that as well. And therefore, the number of criteria you can select and deselect and score ranges and intended majors, it gets pretty complex, and it allows
because you're mixing and matching. So so it's not just that was only 6, but then you mix and match and gender, right? You could use gender.
Yep, gender. Absolutely.
I don't know if you can use race anymore. I know you could in the past, but I don't know if
you could in the past, without a doubt.
Yeah. I don't know if that's
and
something
we did use that in the past to try to expand access. To historically underrepresented groups on our campus, but I'm not sure you can do that anymore.
Are there any things that we're not thinking of that you can use? I feel like we're forgetting a few.
That's a really good question.
Can you look it up right quick and I'll edit this out?
Yeah, I can do it. Let's do that.
And while you do that, I can maybe look up, can you get the exact score?
Yeah, let's do that. I got to sign in. They're going to send me an email. Yeah, that's how you log in now is, you don't have a password. They actually send you an email. Of course, my email's taking forever right now.
It's okay.
Do that. Can you do race? That's a really good question. Let's grab that one.
So this is what it says, by the way, Andy.
Yeah.
Colleges cannot target exact individual scores. College Board never shares actual test scores. To those it licenses data to recruiters. Colleges receive score ranges, not exact scores.
Score ranges. Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I knew they insisted on when I went to one of their conferences, but it's also 2021 info I'm giving you here. Stuff changes on me.
So we have a bunch of APs. Yeah, we have a score range 1260 to 1480 and 1260 to 1540 on the SAT. Can I edit the score? Yeah, I can edit it by every 10 points.
Okay, so you can't.
So I can move
you
it
do
from
that.
1540 to 1550 or 1260.
It will let you do that.
Yep.
So maybe the answer is initially it gives you ranges, but there's a way to go in and edit it if you want something more precise.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's see. Is race part of this? College board exams. Here's my criteria. Demographics. Let's see what it
And
says.
also, besides race, is there anything else we didn't think of?
Male, female. Nope, that's it. You can target first gen.
Okay.
You can target gender, but you can't target race.
And that doesn't surprise me because you remember College Board had the landscape product. And
correct.
They backed off of that,
correct.
I think, in fear of
they
backlash
sunsetted that pretty quick.
Right, in fear of backlash from the administration. So it doesn't surprise you that they would get rid of race as a search factor as well. I kind of was expecting you to say that. Yeah.
Correct.
But first gen is another one that can be used.
Correct.
You can use first gen.
And that's even a little bit dicey because the Department of Education and the Department of Justice have taken a hyper-aggressive interpretation of the 23 Supreme Court decision and have said things like geography-based recruitment practice violates the decision, targeting first gen and other types of race substitutes have the potential to be interpreted as violating, according to the current administration, the 2023 Supreme Court decision. Now, that has not yet been tested in court, and I don't want to be the one who tests that in court, but that has been the interpretation of the current administration.
I'd heard that about geography. That's a little surprising, but maybe not.
Totally.
I mean, yeah.
Yep.
I don't, do you see schools being intimidated by that they're not even saying, hey, we can do geographical recruitment? Or they're like, come on, that's a Supreme Court decision. That's 5-10 years away. It might be a different administration. I'm not going to let that change. Or do you think they're being very circumspect?
I think what they're doing is they're being smart about it. In that if you are going to make efforts to recruit a certain way based on geography, you need to make sure that there's a balance. So, if we're talking about my hometown of the great city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, if you're recruiting in the city of Philadelphia at neighborhoods and schools that are going to have a significant population of underrepresented students on your campus, you balance that out by recruiting other areas of the metropolitan area where, the demographics are going to be a little bit different. And therefore, someone can't really make the argument that your recruitment efforts are totally geographically based to circumvent the 23 decision around race. You say,
it's interesting how far things have come
in the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's interesting how far things have come, Andy, because I don't know if I don't know if you remember, but you came on our Audible podcast a while ago and you talked about how your general counsel said that Supreme Court decision does not impact recruitment.
Correct.
And I interviewed Rick. I don't know if you know Rick Barth, but he is over Clemson. He's the director of undergraduate admissions at Clemson.
I don't know.
I just interviewed him, and he said the same thing, that decision does not talk about recruitment. But Correct. It's been so interpreted as such, and there's been such an aggressive stance that people don't want to get, don't want to be on the other side of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and have to deal with that.
Yeah, and there are two issues here. First is the second Trump administration, when they were inaugurated, sent basically out sort of a dear colleague letter.
That's exactly what it was
indicating that the Department of Education was going to take what most folks would consider to be an extreme interpretation of the 23 Supreme Court decision. When the decision was handed down, we've interpreted it in a way that recruitment and yield, you're allowed to be race aware. It's the selection process in the middle when you have an active application.
Right.
You need to be race blind. That's been our interpretation. And the second piece of this, which is really scary, is that if an organization were to sue a particular institution, the burden of proof lies on the institution, not the plaintiff. It lies with the institution to prove that they are not using race in a certain way. So it's weird that if someone were to sue us, the burden of proof is not on them. The burden of proof is on us. And that has scared a lot of institutions.
Sure. And do you think one of the ways it scared people is to move away from certain custom prompts that colleges were using in their essays, because there were a lot of prompts about how you would add diversity to the student body that have disappeared,
Yeah.
and a lot of us kind of can't help but think of the correlation of, boy, people are trying to do the CYA so that they're not on the other end of a
And
multi-million
the
dollar
other,
lawsuit.
yeah, the other
Hmm.
piece of this is
Hmm.
that, with each application cycle, institutions are going to do a little internal research and sort of say, is this maneuver, whatever it is, requiring testing, not requiring testing, self-reported grades, whatever it is this accomplishing the goals that we would like it to accomplish?
Sure.
And some institutions may have looked at an extra essay prompt and said, this isn't achieving the goal that we would like. And
Hmm.
it may have suppressed application numbers to the point where they're like, we're not
Not
getting
worth
what
it.
we want, and we have fewer applications to begin with.
Not
This
worth it.
just isn't worth the trouble.
Sure. Let's get back to
So,
student search.
yeah.
So the ACT is another source, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is the ACCT any different at all, or just the same thing, just another data source? And how do you look at that?
Same thing, another data source. We don't have much of a history with ACT simply because the majority of our primary markets typically lean a little bit more towards taking the SAT.
All right, Northeast is very SAT,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
oriented part of the country. Very different in
Yep.
places like Illinois, Tennessee, Iowa, and lots of other
Michigan.
places. Michigan.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, where there's some of them are more than 80% ACT, some of them.
Correct.
So you talked about the 3 different approaches you can take. There's
Correct.
the internal,
Yep.
there's the College Board rep, and there's the total outsourcing it to somebody
Correct.
else.
Yep.
Have you ever been involved in the total outsourcing, any school you've worked with? And if not, I know some of your colleagues have. Like, what have you heard from people that have taken that approach, like pros and cons?
We did that when I was the dean at Guilford.
Okay.
We outsourced it entirely to a third-party vendor.
Mm-hmm.
And the rationale why you would do that is more technology and logistics than anything else, is that prior to Slate being the gorilla of the CRM and the admission world.
Explain that, Andy, in case anybody doesn't know what you're talking about there.
Yeah. So Slate is essentially the database that we use at Connecticut College. It is a database that is specifically designed for college admissions. And it has gone from, in 10 to 12 years, it has gone from a bit player, a new kid on the block, to being the predominant database that's used in college admission. Most folks are either A, on Slate, or B, want to be on Slate, or C, are migrating to Slate as we speak.
Yeah, in 2024, I talked to Slate at NACAC when they were in LA, and they had 1,900 clients then, but that was up from 1,300, like not too long ago. So who knows what the number is now? I'm sure it's over 2,000, which is a lot of the colleges.
We migrated to Slate in about 2014, 2015. So right before I got here, and now most everybody is on Slate. But prior to that, it was a hodgepodge of databases, and none of them were really designed for the purpose of college admissions. And as a result, the technological ability to import, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 high school names and then directly market them. And that could be a physical mailing. It could be an email. Who knows? Trying to do that in-house with your technological platform was difficult. And then historically, most search campaigns used a print piece, and printing and mailing with personal URLs or QR codes or things like that was not something that logistically many institutions or admission offices could handle. So when I was at Guilford, we worked with a third-party vendor who would help us design our purchase, would take the names, would directly market them first with a postcard that had a personal URL on it. So, if we were sending something to Mark Stucker in Atlanta, Georgia, there was a URL on your postcard, and it was a personal URL. So when you, typed in or clicked on it or whatever, it went to a landing page that had most of your information already pre-populated to facilitate the process of filling out that request for information form, pushing submit, and then our third-party vendor would then send us that name and say, Mark Stucker from Atlanta, Georgia, responded positively to our search campaign. He's interested in Guilford. please send them some more stuff. But we didn't have the manpower or the technological platform to do it. So we had to pay a third-party vendor to do it.
And it was expensive. Schools were spending a lot of money on this.
Super expensive.
Yeah, super expensive. So Slate has really cut into that market share a lot. Slate can do
I
a
would
lot.
say so, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the downside of that is cost, that method.
Yep.
Is it only cost, or is it just not as efficient as other methods? What do you think?
I would also say that the other downside is I have discovered over the course of my career, it's really hard for a third-party vendor to put their finger on the pulse of a particular community and school.
Sense.
If you're a third-party vendor and you're working with 25 small liberal arts colleges, how do you differentiate between those 25 schools? Each place has a distinct flavor and personality, but you're there for a day doing quote unquote discovery and you're doing a couple of meetings. But unless you live there and really get to know the students, it's hard. And as a result, it's difficult to tailor the messaging in a way that really captures the essence of your institution in a compelling and authentic way.
So when you're juxtaposing the third party method to what you're now doing, which is we're taking over that.
Yes.
And so you feel like we can put stuff through the litmus test of, no, this captures the essence of Connecticut College. This is what a camel looks like. And they're in a way that they could, and you're spending all this time trying to educate them and this when you can do it better yourselves on that component of things.
We write it ourselves. We import the names we get from College Board straight into Slate. They have a specific sort of classification in our funnel. They have a source code that comes from College Board, and they get their own sort of communication campaign that's written entirely by us. And as a result, it sounds and feels like everything else that we craft and we send to prospective students.
So I'm asking you a question that there's no way you're going to know. So I'm just asking you to approximate. Speculate. That's a better word. Speculate. So if you were to think of all the colleges, out there doing a campaign, what percentage do you think are doing it in-house versus working through the College Board liaison rep and letting them do it versus the third party? If you had to speculate,
I would say probably 60 to 65% are probably doing it in-house.
Okay, you think that's the majority?
I'd say maybe 25% are using a third party vendor.
Okay,
and then 10% are leveraging and using College Board for assistance.
One of the downsides with College Board is it's just College Board. I want to get in a second. I want to get into some other players that have come into the search market that schools are experimenting with, and that, I guess that's one of the downsides, is it kind of limits you to College Board if you if you go the third. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And if you use a third party vendor, and I would say those institutions are probably really, really large and are running massively large campaigns. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of names purchased, casting a really wide net. Using a third-party vendor can allow you to diversify your sources a little bit, because they can College Board / SAT, ACT, niche. Used to be
EAB has one now. EAB, I don't know if you were Appley.
Yep, we dabble with Appley a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Niche is another
even
one.
Reddit, I've heard even Reddit and College Vine have So what we're talking about here is that there are new players that have emerged.
Yep.
And I've talked with other chief enrollment officers like you, this is one of the things they've told me is College Board and ACT aren't the only players anymore.
Correct.
And niche is another major one that oftentimes people experiment on, and some of them report higher conversion rates off niche than just College Board. Talk to our listeners a little bit about some of these other players and why you would choose to work with them and what you get out of that, like a niche, for example.
Yeah, so I would say that it is smart, incumbent upon institutions to try to diversify the means by which they bring students into their communication flow. So we have dabbled with it in the past. Absolutely. We signed on with niche a year ago, and we were literally just talking about niche right before I came on to record this podcast with you, Mark.
Fortuitous.
It's very fortuitous, but we're not in a position where we can assess what's occurred with niche, because we signed on with them just about a year ago and focused all of our efforts on high school sophomores and juniors.
Right.
They're now rising seniors and rising juniors. And as a result, we'll see what happens with niche over the course of this cycle. The rep with niche is that a smaller number of names, but higher conversion rates. They
Yeah.
tend to be stronger fit
Yes.
type of students. And as a result, smaller volume, but greater return on investment per name.
I mean, I've read some stats that looked pretty compelling if they're accurate, like significantly higher conversion. So you'll have
Correct.
to report back and see if that's what you find out after you've had a few cycles,
Exactly. We're curious to see what happens. And
Now,
again, they go into the same zone of our database,
right.
but with a different sort of introductory, what we would call a source code, the source of the name, the first source. So they get a different name, and we can do analysis on, how did our names that we got from travel, how did they do? How did the names that we got from high school visits? How did the names from campus visits do? All that stuff.
Yeah, I like it.
We generally look at that on an annual basis to sort of see where the return on investment is coming from.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you explained that. So one of the things I heard a lot, Andy, around 6 years ago, when we were in the heart of COVID, 2020, 2021, and we were right in that phase where people literally couldn't take the SAT because literally sites were closed down because of COVID.
Correct.
That really impacted search, because all of a sudden one of your core way in which you're relying on getting your database, and then you have a significant number of people that were saying, "Oh, I'm test optional," and they're not taking it. And that was one of the things that led to some of these other players in the market springing up and schools experimenting with the niches and the applees, and I'm told College Vine and a bunch of these people have Reddit. They all have different lead gen sources out there. Is that consistent with what you experienced, that that there was a decrease and other new players kind of started flooding the market and people started experimenting with some? I mean, College Board has always still been the core. I'm not trying to make it sound like these other ones have become the main source, but the market share they have gained market share in the last 7-8 years.
I would say absolutely. And then there's the introduction, advent of Naviance, Score, sort of secondary digital marketing.
Yes, that's a big one.
That high schools will use, we use a database on our end to coordinate what we're doing.
Yes.
But most every high school also has sort of a college counseling database, whether it's Naviance or Score or Maya Learning or some of the others.
Yeah.
Which allows a counseling office to coordinate with students and parents what's going on with the college search. And then, these places realize maybe we could make money by selling advertising platforms on our device. So we now have contracts with Naviance and Score, which allows us to, when a student says, yes, I'm interested in Connecticut College, boom, that name will come to us. So there are other ways and other players in the field which have come online since the pandemic, which have also provided some valuable resources for us.
I'm glad you brought those up, because I know those are major players. Here's a question I've been wanting to ask you. So my understanding is when somebody uses Big Future, which this is the College Board's product,
the College
right?
Board, yep.
And they go in there and they put some names on a list that if you use the College Board product, you can get access to. Well, the students kind of got these names on their Big Future list. Is that true?
Same thing with Common App.
Yeah.
Someone adds Connecticut College.
Talk about how that works with Common App. Someone adds Connecticut College to the Common App.
Yep.
They haven't applied yet.
Correct.
But it's sitting in their Common App. Tell me what you can see and you can't see with that.
Well, I don't know exactly what I can see and what I can't see, but they get, so let's just say we have a student and the student is looking at a selection of small liberal arts colleges, right?
Yes.
And it's after August 1st of their senior year. So they've created their Common App account and they've started creating their list of schools, right? And then their college counselor or their high school counselor says, hey, or Mark Stucker says, hey, you should think about Connecticut College. They're a really good place, blah, blah, blah. So the student goes in and adds Connecticut College to their queue on the Common App. They haven't applied.
Right.
They just say, it's part of my list of schools that I'm thinking of or intending to apply to. Because we're a Common App member, we then get that name as what is known as a Common App suspect. Someone who has added Connecticut College to their queue on the Common App. Boom. We get that. We may already have that name, but if we don't have that name, we get that name.
Yes.
And then we can identify that person as saying they've started their application and they have indicated they might be applying to Connecticut College. So we can start communicating with them about hey, by the way, we have an open house coming up, or our early decision deadline is coming up. Someone might be able to say like, hey, listen, if you're interested in merit aid, maybe you want a merit estimate, feel free to reach out to us and we'll do this, this, and this. Or someone who does travel subsidies, like, hey, have you thought about visiting campus? We have travel subsidies. So reach out to us and let us know. But we can identify and communicate with students based on the fact that they've indicated they might be applying to Khan.
So what if somebody puts you in their Common App and it's as simple as clicking an X to get rid of you? So let's say you're in there for 2 weeks. They could, you still could have the name, right? It could be like an auto generator. As soon as it came up, it automatically sends it to you, even if they X'd you out.
Correct.
Yeah.
Once they're in the database as a Common App suspect or prospect, we're going to keep them in there as an inquiry until they sort of unsubscribe and say, leave me alone.
So is it possible, as schools build out predictive modeling, that that's one of the things that they could look at is where we entered into the Common App? And, or, you know what I mean? Or when did we go in, or any of those kinds of things? Like that could be factored into you trying to make predictions, right? Why not?
Oh yeah. People could use that in a demonstrated interest formula.
Exactly.
To determine the affinity of the student and the likelihood to enroll.
Yeah.
Adding us to the Common App on August 15th looks a lot different than someone who adds us to the Common App on January 15th at 11:45 p.m.
That's what I'm glad you brought that up, because not only did you add, but when did you add? Has interest been potentially sustained?
Someone could decide to factor that into a demonstrated interest sort of calculation.
I mean, to be totally honest, if I was doing one, that would be one I would look at. I would at least test it out and want to see how predictive it is.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're thinking about applying to me and I'm in the Common App, you can't come here if I don't at least make the list.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've actually wanted to talk to you about that for a few years. I forgot about it until you brought it up.
Okay, good.
So that was good. And some of the others out there, they're not as prevalent, but I see them. School links. I'm seeing more school links, which is like a Maya Learner. Zello.
That's, I think, more evident or prevalent at public schools.
Yeah, I'll see Zello.
We were just talking about that last week, actually.
In San Diego, I tend to see a lot of Zello. Xello. That's another one you'll see. Yeah. Okay. Power School is one sometimes you see. Yeah, so these other ones that are showing up. All right, so a couple other things I wanted to ask you about search. So once you have identified who you want to target, and we've talked about some of the criteria that go into that, one of the decisions you need to make next is, are we going to use email or direct mail to reach out? One of the things I've been hearing, and you tell me if this is true, and I've been hearing this for years, is schools have been moving more to the email and less direct mail, mostly because of the cost. Because with direct mail, I mean, it's not just a matter of direct mail. You gotta have all the production costs of who's designing the whole thing, right? And all of that, and then there's the mailings, and then are you gonna go low budget, or are you gonna go with this magazine kind of thing? And there's massive costs there. It doesn't mean they've completely eliminated it, but the shift toward more email, less direct mail has happened in the last 10 to 15 years across the industry. Is that fair?
Fair. Very fair.
Yeah. What is your experience with things like how, is email versus direct mail more effective? How often sending pieces results in stuff? Because there's so much experimenting on different things here, right? To try to figure out where you're going to get the return on your investment. What have you found kind of works, and what's kind of like a waste of your money and time?
Well, Mark, you bring up a really interesting point. I'm sure you know Lloyd Thacker, correct?
Yes. I don't know him personally, but I know who he is, of course.
I've met Lloyd, and this is 20 years ago.
One of my big regrets, Andy.
Not meeting Lloyd?
Well, yeah. So, I worked with Susan Tree at Westtown for years.
Yeah.
And one time Susan said to me, hey, Lloyd's speaking in Baltimore. Do you want to go? It was like a last second thing, And I went back and forth in my mind, and I didn't go. So anyway, I live with that regret.
My recollection, and this is, decades ago, so it's a little fuzzy, but I believe he was a college counselor somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And he grew concerned with the amount of money that institutions were spending on marketing. Because if you think about it, every dollar we spend on marketing is one less dollar we spend on educating.
It sounds like Lloyd, by the way.
And as a result, for us on the higher ed side, institutions have to figure out what's the appropriate level of spend when it comes to marketing and getting the name of your institution out versus what's the appropriate level of spend on everything else that you're doing here. faculty salaries and academic support and co-curricular activities and, bands and ventriloquists on weekend nights and all of those things. And we all have to wrestle with, okay, one, how much do we have to spend? And two, where do we want to spend it? I have typically, I believe there's a value in printed pieces because we want something to land on the kitchen table. It's also one of the easiest way that we can get our name in front of parents, and they can flip through it while they're sitting around at the kitchen table and be like, oh yeah, by the way, one of my colleagues graduated from Connecticut College. He says great things about it. You should, or she says great things about it. Maybe you should look at it. And where in the funnel should you invest your resources in print materials? If we had unlimited resources, we would print everything and mail everything. What's his name? LaJoy, who's the postmaster general, would love Connecticut College because we would be, single-handedly solving the deficit from the United States Postal Service. But we don't have unlimited resources. We actually operate in a fairly budgetarily restricted environment compared to other institutions. So we have to figure out how much print do we want to use and where do we want to use it in our process. And for us, we've landed in this idea that, when we're talking about search and prospects, students who have not yet raised their hand and said they're interested in Connecticut College, we're going to rely on email. Once a student raises their hand and says, yes, I'm interested in Connecticut College, then we're going to send them a print piece, and the print piece is going to land on the kitchen table. It's fairly sizable. It's heavy. It lands with a thud. There's a lot of nice pictures and some really solid content in it. But my sense is that more and more institutions are trying to take their print stuff and focus it lower down in the funnel for students who have expressed greater levels of interest in the institution. And as a result, search, which are proactive outreach to students who have not yet expressed an interest in a particular institution, has tended to be concentrated a little bit more in electronic communication, is what I'd say.
Great. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, if you're enjoying this content, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification. You'll get new videos as soon as they hit. Share, comment. We want to interact with you. You might have heard Andy say funnel twice. I'm glad he did, because what I meant to tell you is this is actually a two-parter. We're starting out talking about search, and then we're going to come back in a few minutes here actually and record a second segment on the admissions funnel, of which search is just a piece of the funnel. And so this is a two-parter. So if you want to know more about funnel, you got to tune in for that video, which will be actually recording in the same segment, but it'll be a separate video.
You want me to change my shirt between segments so it looks like it's a different recording? I only brought one golf shirt with me today, Mark.
Good.
So
we're good.
Unfortunately, that's not going to work.
Although, if I'm being honest, I've done that before.
I'm sure you have. I didn't even think about it.
I've done it before. Yeah. So, no, all good. All good. So, search, I don't know, last I checked, 50 cents a name, something like that. It goes up, and I wrote my book. It was 37 cents, I think. And it's, it goes up a few cents every year, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I tell this story. So my oldest daughter, the one that went to Davidson, she had 29 direct mail pieces from Vanderbilt. And I'm going to say 10 of them were like glossy, multiple page. Man, this is expensive. And I mean, that institution is cutting down a lot of trees over there, because for a while, I kept them all in boxes, and I had a file folder for every school.
Yeah.
More because I was, I'm in the business, so I was just sort of interested
curiosity.
in how schools market. After a while, it was like taking up so much space, I just dumped it all. But
yeah,
but I mean, Chicago, there's some schools that really spend. And
yes.
And as far as buys, what would you say is the range that you see, Andy? List of names that that schools can buy.
At our scale and scope of institution, we're going to buy somewhere in the range of 200,000 names per year, which for, again, institutions of our scope, I would say is probably bottom half.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll hear 500,000. They tend to be a little bit bigger.
Easily. Depending on budget and institutional objective and outreach and things of that nature.
And I've also heard 100,000 for some of your competitors. So it just depends.
It could be 100, 200. Yeah. I tend to think we're probably in the bottom half at 200. And then other institutions are just buying hundreds and hundreds of thousands of names per year, sometimes probably north of 1 million. You probably have some large Research One institutions that have really robust academic programs that are buying north of 1 million names a year.
Yeah,
which is a $500,000 expense.
Yeah. Yeah,
if you think about
just off the 50 cents. And that
Yeah.
doesn't count your postage and your design if you're doing mailings.
Exactly.
And that design piece and production piece is a big number.
Yep.
So this is a lot of money.
Exactly.
But you need to get students, and as we've discussed, this is some people call it spray and pray, but it's like
Yep.
the best way to blanket the country.
Yep.
Like there isn't a better way to reach the masses. So there's probably one more thing we should talk about before we move off this topic. And there's anything else that you can think of that we haven't talked about, but sometimes I get this response from a family, and every time I hear it, I'm like, this is why colleges do it. They'll say, it usually comes from a parent. They'll say, man, this school wants my kid badly. They're recruiting them hard.
Oh, yeah.
And that is interpreted as they want them badly. That's the interpretation.
Yes.
And you probably know I have to push back against that. So, what I'll say is, and I want you to critique how I explain it. It's not willy-nilly that you're getting that. They didn't just pick straws. It is intentional. Some thought went into you getting that. They do want your application based on what they know about you. However, let's consider all the things they don't know about you. They haven't seen your transcript. Right. We always say that's the single most important thing, right? We haven't seen the transcript. We don't know the courses, the grades, the grade trends. We haven't seen any thing on recommendations. We haven't seen anything at all on extracurriculars. We haven't seen anything on writing,
Right. Yeah.
And we don't really have anything on demonstrated interest.
Correct.
So there's a lot of things that play a role in the decision that they don't have access to. They just know that based off of an initial cursory glance, basic academic information, maybe some priorities, maybe they're trying to grow their program. The student expressed an interest in the major. Maybe they want more kids from that part of the country or whatever. You look like you're of interest. So don't interpret that as I'm probably getting in. And one of my pet peeves, we have a Grinding My Gears series. I really need to take this over to my Grinding My Gears, is when the biggest brand names of the brand names target a student that is outside of their academic profile by quite a bit.
Right.
And now the family thinks their kid is getting in Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, because they cast a wide net. And I know from the school standpoint, well, how do we know they won't take an improvement in their scores or whatever? And they told me that. But that creates a lot of problems for me on the counseling side, because you already have the problem with parents can't imagine how much admissions has changed from when they went, coupled with the fact that you see what you want to see. And now this brand name school sending multiple pieces of mail. I remember one parent saying to me, because I tried to push back and say, just because you're getting mail doesn't mean you're likely to get in. And from my data and from my evidence, this looks like a real long shot to me. I never forget, Andy, a parent saying right to me, well, I respect you, but in all due respect, I respect the school's ability to know who they want more than your opinion. And they're sending me this mail. So that's one of my pet peeves. But would you think that's fair the way I characterized it? Like it's not coincidental that you're getting it. You're a person of interest, but there's too much information that is not available now for you to assume this means I'm probably getting in. And of course, especially as you go up the selectivity meter, it gets harder and harder where there's single digits and low teen admit rates. Thoughts?
Right. There are two things I would add to that.
Okay.
First, I don't know a single institution in the country that wants to become less selective than it currently is.
Of course. The people that you report to don't want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second piece is that if you think about this from a mathematical, quantitative perspective, why are the most selective institutions in the country that selective? It's because of the denominator. And the way to remain super duper selective.
When Andy says denominator, he's talking about number of applications to the spots.
Is to drive that bottom number higher.
Yes.
No one wants fewer applications. So you're going to, if you have the resources, you're going to bombard every possible person. Because if you have 40,000 applications, you want 45. If you get to 45, what do you want? You want 50, which means you need to encourage folks to apply. So I think you're right on the money with the conversations you're having with students and families that there's just so much that is unknown. They can't know that we're going to accept you when they're mailing you stuff, because they don't have a transcript, they don't have a letter of recommendation, they don't
I don't
have
know.
an
I don't even know
essay,
if I
they
even
have
said letter
none
of
of it.
Rex. I might not even said letter of Rex in that list. I might have missed that one.
Yeah,
A
no,
very
you said it.
important one.
You
Oh, I
said it.
did? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then think about it. So you're doing 200,000 mailers for a class of 450 to 500. Now, I know you have to accept more than 450 to get the 450, but even if you accepted 3,000, that's 200,000. That's 200,000 mailers to accept a few thousand kids. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you'd also agree with me. It's not haphazard. You didn't just grab names out of a straw lottery style. We've talked about there was planning, there was intentionality that went into it, but you can't just make that leap that, man, they want my kid badly.
Yeah.
They want your kid's application badly. That's fair.
Yes. That's it right there.
That's fair.
Yes.
So, this might sound so basic, but I think it's important to answer. So you know how you said there's not a school in the country that doesn't want more applications?
Correct.
I could see someone saying, why? Why does every school want more applications? I know that's so foundational, but we have different people of all different places and where they are in their learning curve here, Andy.
Right.
Explain why every school wants more apps.
We have this weird notion in American society that somehow more selective means better.
Yeah.
I run into students, occasionally run into students who will be really honest with me. And these are students that I've met through other walks of life who probably are not that interested in Connecticut College, which then frees up a level of honesty in our conversations, which I really appreciate. And they will admit, like, I care about selectivity. I want to go to a school with the lowest admit rate because it is a perception that the school is, quote unquote, a better school, a better academic school. And years ago, actually, I went to a college fair in suburban Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I was sitting down before the fair with, two folks who worked at institutions in Pennsylvania. It was late April, I think, mid-April. And someone said, well, how was your year? And one of the reps said, lowest admit rate ever.
Yeah.
And my initial thought is like, okay, what does that mean? Does that make your institution better than it was last year?
Yeah.
It doesn't. But there's this perception in American society that more selective means better.
I'm convinced, and I've done some other videos on this, that acceptance rate actually is trumped rankings now in people's minds. It carries more weight.
Yeah.
And I'll even put it in student terms. More selective means I get respect from my peers.
Right.
That's how I get respect from my peers. That's how my Instagram rollout really lands.
Yep. Yeah.
Or I'll put it in terms that one of my students shared with me this year. And I so appreciate her saying this because she just encapsulated how so many of the students I work with think. We're having, I have all these conversations about name and prestige and selectivity. And here's what she said. Let me put it this way. When I tell people where I'm going to college, the first thing I want to pop into their head is, damn, that girl is smart.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that like the encapsulation of how a lot of people, and what does that mean? It means you got in a really, really hard place that only takes really, really smart kids. Now, there's lots of flaws with that, which we could unpack. But as you've said many times,
that's a whole nother episode in and of itself, Mark.
Well, no, and you've said many times on our Audible podcast, and I so appreciate it that you've said something to this effect, Andy, and I love it. It usually doesn't end well for you telling people what to value or something. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can not like that, but we're talking about the world that is, not versus the world that I would like it to be.
Yeah, exactly. There's a line, I think, from an old movie, The American President, with Michael Douglas, where someone's like, the American people have a funny thing about you telling them what they should care about. You know?
That's what you said.
Yeah, something like that. It's like,
Yeah, so that's the reality. Right. Good stuff, Andy. Appreciate you as always, my friend.
All right, Mark, you're the man, buddy.
Thank you.